Hello, YouTubers and NFL fans everywhere. This is Matt, the NFL Fanatic, with my Week 12 2014 NFL predictions. Well, last week, for the first time in about 5 or 6 weeks, I did not have a double-digit winning record. I went 8-6, and now overall for the year, I'm 102, 58, and 1, which equals up to about 63.8%, 64%, so I didn't really move that much up from my percentage points last week. Well, but hey, what are you supposed to do when you have a bunch of bizarre games happen? For all fantasy owners out there, the Pittsburgh Steelers and Carolina Panthers are on a bye this week, so Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Martavius Bryant, Heath Miller, Cam Newton, Kelvin Benjamin, the Panthers defense, any of their running backs, especially not like Garrett Blount because he got cut the other day. They are all on byes this week, so if you have any of players on your fantasy teams, bench them like I had to do with Bell. And for all fantasy owners as well, this is the last week of the bye season. So after this week, none of the teams are back on byes, and all 16 teams will be playing football again on Thanksgiving week. What an insane week in the NFL. So many teams showed that they're contenders, so many teams showed that they're pretenders, and other teams showed how really bad they are. The first game I'm going to go to will be Kansas City and Seattle. What an incredible game by both teams. I thought it was very competitive, very even, but you saw how Kansas City legitimized themselves as not an up-and-coming team and not a pretender. I truly believe this Chiefs team can make a run in the playoffs. Looking at how they are playing football, they are playing an old-school brand of football. Run the ball with Charles, who had 150 yards on the ground, which was incredibly impressive. Niall Davis had a solid game, and you win with defense. Seattle's offense, for the most part, played a better game than Kansas City's did. Alex Smith threw for only 100 yards. But Kansas City, on 3 big fourth downs, halted that Seahawks offense. And that was the difference in the game. Kudos to Andy Reid. You know, what a turnaround from 1-2, or from 0-2, to now they're 7-3, and now tied with the Denver Broncos for first in the AFC West. For Seattle, it's just another sign that you don't really have the same confidence in this Seahawks team as in years past, because I definitely saw a team that got rushed around by Charles. Their offense really could not move anything. Russell Wilson could not be as active on his feet as he usually is able to before, in the past. And I thought that was a huge difference. So, Seattle, your playoff hopes are slim, and definitely next week and Thanksgiving night when you play San Fran, that's a playoff elimination game to me. So that's my thoughts on that. Speaking of the AFC West, let's go to Denver, who had the upset of the week by losing to the St. Louis Rams 22-7. I was incredibly surprised because St. Louis is the most bizarre team to me in the entire league. Their record is 4-6. However, over the last 5 weeks, they've beaten the Seattle Seahawks, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Denver Broncos. They have now 3 of their 4 wins are against teams that are combined 19-11. How can they be 4-6 and have those quality of wins, but yet they've lost to, they got blown out by Minnesota. They got blown out by Kansas City, and now look at that game. That looks even more impressive. San Francisco beat them earlier, and you're just wondering, how is this team 4-6 with those quality wins? From Denver's perspective, I thought that Denver definitely got exposed because, again, kind of like Seattle, except it wasn't in the back end, this was the front end. They got a ton of pressure on Peyton Manning. He got sacked 2 or 3 times. He only scored 7 points, even though he did break a record, and he finally threw for 300 yards in the St. Louis Rams. If nobody actually knew this, Peyton Manning had never thrown for 300 yards against St. Louis Rams in the 3 times that they had played. So kudos for him for that, but again, this was the first. They snapped the 15 straight games with 2 touchdowns. It snapped the, 30-game streak that they started where they've scored over 20 points. And it just left the big eyesore. And a quick little note, best prayers go out to Julius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders for a quick recovery. I saw that hit that Thomas that McLeod hit on Sanders. That was a pretty vicious hit, but I thought that was extremely legal. He led with the shoulder, and I didn't think he deserved that unnecessary roughness penalty. So, again, I think Denver will be okay, but they're playing a tough Miami team coming off a big win. And looking at Miami's team, they definitely can do the same thing that St. Louis could. Miami has the second overall defense in the league. They have about the third-ranked rush defense and the second overall pass defense. So this team can do what Denver did, and we'll see what happens. Let's see. A couple other things. Kudos to Arizona for continuing to show why they are the best team in the league to me. They played a very good Detroit Lion team who had just won 4 straight going into the game. And with Drew Stanton, even with the 2 picks, he still threw for over 300 yards and 2 big touchdowns. And that Arizona secondary was able to hold Calvin Johnson and Golden Tate for a combined 100 yards. That's incredibly impressive to me with how the seasons they're having and the people they were going up against. And it just continues to show that this Arizona team, Bruce Arians is my coach of the year. I've enjoyed seeing what he's done to this team, and this entire team is believing in Arizona's system. And I know what people are saying. Some people would say, New England's the better team, Matt. Well, I understand where people are coming from, because especially with Carson Palmer going down, Drew Stanton against Tom Brady, yeah, that's a tough sell, and Tom Brady's better. But if you go win-by-win comparison, the only one that people that would consider the Patriots would be Denver, because Arizona got thrashed by Denver and New England thrashed Denver. But I can go back and say they beat Detroit, New England beat Indy. They've also beaten Philadelphia and Dallas. And you look at New England's wins, and I think, they did beat Cincinnati, and I think you can counteract. You can match win for win with that. But kudos to Arizona for that. And also kudos to the Green Bay Packers for absolutely thrashing the Philadelphia Eagles 53-20. I was incredibly shocked at how bad the Philadelphia Eagles played. You had 2 interceptions by Sanchez, another fumble that went for a pick 6. You had a kick return that went for a pick 6. And they just, by the end of the half, the game was over. And it's starting to show to me that this Green Bay Packer team is becoming the New Orleans Saints that we know of over the last several years. They are absolutely dominant at home. And looking at what they've done over the last 5 home games, they're 5-0 at home. They've beaten every one of their opponents by an average of a little over 30 points a game. That if they get home field advantage in the playoffs, the Packers will get to the Super Bowl. However, I don't expect that to happen because Green Bay has done terrible on the road. The only road win they have is against, I think, Chicago when they beat the crap out of the Bears. But again, the Bears only have 1 home win themselves. So that's really not that impressive. You look at their other 3 losses, Matthew Stafford threw 3 picks in a game, they still lost 19-7. Seattle in the season over thrashed them 36-17, and New Orleans, looking at what they've done at home now over the last 2 weeks, absolutely thrashed the Packers 44-23. The biggest thing to me in those games where they can't stop the run in those games. And looking at an Arizona or looking at a Philadelphia, again maybe in Philly, or looking at a Seattle or a San Fran, those teams can definitely run the ball, and I think that will present a challenge to the Packers. And for Philadelphia, I think this is the best thing is that even though you got thrashed by Green Bay, you're still tied with the Cowboys for the lead. But now that means that Thanksgiving game next week is a lot more important. And a couple more final things. Sorry for the Raiders for such a tough loss against the Chiefs, or against the Chargers. They absolutely I thought they outplayed them because Rivers got knocked around and they actually injured Rivers. But at the end of the day, Oakland's still winless, and with the schedule they have and the opponents they're facing, I don't see Oakland actually winning a game. I know it's sad, but at least you'll be with the Detroit Lions, and you're not the only team that's 0-16. And lastly, before I get to my picks, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Redskins situation. I watched that game against Tampa. It was absolutely pathetic. RG3 had 209 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. He has now 700 yards, 760 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. The man hasn't won a game in a year. He was throwing his teammates under the bus. I have to say, for all Redskins fans, it's time for you to get rid of RG3 and move on. or give Colt McCoy the opportunity to show what he's worth. Because the last guy that won a game for the Washington Redskins all year would be Colt McCoy. And he looked the most efficient out of all those quarterbacks. Colt McCoy looked calm. He looked sound. He made timely throws. He looked incredibly poised. And he beat the Cowboys, who were now 7-3. That was Colt McCoy who did that, not RG3. So, best of luck to the Redskins fans for the rest of the year. All right, that's enough for my thoughts on last week. Time for my picks. Tomorrow, when the 7-3 Kansas City Chiefs go to the Oakland Raiders, I am taking the Kansas City Chiefs. And then on Sunday, when the 6-4 Cleveland Browns go to the NFC South leading, I do have to say that again, the NFC South leading 4-6 Atlanta Falcons, I am taking the Cleveland Browns. When the 2-8 Tennessee Titans go to the 7-3 Philadelphia Eagles, I'm going to take the Philadelphia Eagles. When the 7-3 Detroit Lions go to the 8-2 New England Patriots, I'm going to take the New England Patriots. When the 7-3 Green Bay Packers go to the 4-6 Minnesota Vikings, I'm going to take the Green Bay Packers. When the 1-9 Jacksonville Jaguars go to the 6-4 Indianapolis Colts, I'm going to take the Indianapolis Colts. When the 6-3-1 Cincinnati Bengals go to the 5-5 Houston Texans, I'm going to take the Cincinnati Bengals. When the 2-8 New York Jets go to the 5-5 Buffalo Bills, I am taking the Buffalo Bills. When the 2-8 Tampa Bay Buccaneers go to the 4-6 Chicago Bears, I'm going to take the Chicago Bears. When the 9-1 Arizona Cardinals go to the 6-4 Seattle Seahawks, I am taking the Arizona Cardinals. When the 4-6 St. Louis Rams go to the 6-4 San Diego Chargers, I'm going to take the St. Louis Rams. When the 6-4 Miami Dolphins go to the 7-3 Denver Broncos, I'm going to take the Denver Broncos. When the 3-7 Washington Redskins go to the 6-4 San Francisco 49ers, I'm taking the San Francisco 49ers. And then in the Sunday night game, when the 7-3 Dallas Cowboys go to the 3-7 New York Giants, I'm going to take the Dallas Cowboys. And then in the Monday night game, when the 6-4 Baltimore Ravens go to the 4-6 New Orleans Saints, I'm going to take the Baltimore Ravens. All right, time for my thoughts on my picks. Kansas City at Oakland, this was extremely easy. Kansas City, again, is one of the hottest teams out there. Even though, again, they have not thrown a touchdown to a wide receiver still all year. Through 10 games, none of their receivers have touchdowns. The Green Bay Packers have 27 touchdowns since the last time a wide receiver caught a touchdown for the Kansas City Chiefs. They have the number 1 ranked pass defense in the entire league. They have the number 2 ranked defense overall. And just looking at that going up against this Oakland Raider team, that ever since Sperano has come in, they have played a lot better besides the Bronco game. They have been in almost every one of their games, and they have been competitive. But I just can't see Derek Carr being able to get anything. This Kansas City front has been able to rush the passer extremely well. Charles can easily run through that Raider defense. Even though Ryan Matthews at 70 yards, I think Chris Anderson and all of them have proven that they can get a decent amount of yards. And I trust the mojo of this team better than the Raider team. I think the Chiefs secondary can shut down Oakland's receivers. I think Seattle had a better receiving core. And I think Oakland's is worse. And I just don't see a good vibe with this Raider team. This Chief team is motivated. They're on fire. And I think this Oakland team, even though they have been competitive more again, I don't see any way that this Chief team loses to the Raiders. And actually, that is one of my locks. I'm going to take the Kansas City Chiefs as a lock to beat the Oakland Raiders. Just because KC just has better overall talent and a better overall feel for defense. And I don't think Oakland's offense can do that much against this KC defense. So that's what taking Kansas City over Oakland. Cleveland over Atlanta. I watched that game against the Texans, and I was incredibly impressed and disappointed by both teams. Ryan Mallett looked very good. And credit Bill O'Brien for actually pulling the younger switch and taking Ryan Mallett over Ryan Fitzpatrick. He went 20 of 30, 211 yards, 2 TDs, and a pick. That's a solid game going against that Cleveland defense. Where Brian Hoyer, on the other end, went 20 of 50 for 320 yards and a touchdown, and that's it. And they were competitive in the majority of this game, but they just couldn't capitalize on that many drives, and Hoyer was just threw it too many times. You don't usually win a game with a quarterback like Brian Hoyer throwing it 50 times. But looking at Atlanta has a little bit of momentum. They've won 2 straight games against their division, and now they're leading the worst division in football, the NFC South. And they are finally home after 6 weeks. But looking at what happened the last time Atlanta played at home, they lost to the Bears 27-13 pretty convincingly. And here's the thing I just thought of. There is one key piece that the Cleveland Browns are getting back, and that is Josh Gordon. He was the number 1 overall receiver last year. He was number 12 in the NFL Top 100. So when you get a player like that, and think about how huge this is, because a lot of Browns fans thought he was done for the year. That's going to spark this offense a lot. And looking at how bad Atlanta's corners have been, and Atlanta's secondary has been against big receivers, I expect Josh Gordon to pick up right where he left off and dominate this Falcons secondary. I think Atlanta can definitely run the ball pretty well, and with Steven Jackson, especially with Phil Taylor, Carlos Dansby, and Sheard, their other defensive linemen being out, that defensive line is definitely weakened. But I think Atlanta's offense is going to have a tough time going against Cleveland's corners. I know they have definitely a one advantage, but I don't see their tight ends getting that much, and I just see this Cleveland team being able to bounce back. Because if Brian Hoyer gets beat by the Falcons, I truly believe Johnny Manziel is very close to maybe getting in, because Manziel would give that offense a spark. And I'm not saying Brian Hoyer has not done bad, but if he starts collapsing, Browns fans are going to be feeling that maybe it's time for a change just to save this good of a season. I think Atlanta has a shot there at home, and they're a little motivated, but Cleveland's secondary, even though I said this last week about Houston, I think their secondary should be able to stop Atlanta's offense enough, and Josh Gordon should be able to do enough on offense to spark the Browns' offense in a win over this Falcon team, who has not beaten a non-division opponent all year. They're 0-6 outside of the division. So that's why I'm taking Cleveland over Atlanta. Tennessee and Philadelphia. I'm taking Philadelphia based on the fact that Philadelphia just has a better offense. Look, Tennessee on Monday night, Zach Mettenberger, not Ben Roethlisberger, but Mettenberger, looked very good. He had some big-time throws. He made some good, smart decisions. He was calm, he was poised, and he showed how good his arm can be. And he is taking on the 29th overall defense in the entire league. LaShawn McCoy only had about 40 yards rushing, but again, I think that's where they're going to have a huge advantage. Le'Veon Bell had 33 carries for 206 yards against the Titans. So if they give the ball to Shady and Sproles enough, they should be able to do the same thing. But I think everybody can agree, LaShawn McCoy is a better running back than Le'Veon Bell when fully running. And I just think if you're getting into an offensive shootout, Philadelphia has enough offensive weapons, and they're at home, and they have not lost a home game at all this year either. That's enough for me to trust this Sanchez enough in this type of game to beat the Titans. Because that Green Bay defense and Tennessee's defense are 2 completely different defenses with 2 different levels of talent. And I think, will Sanchez maybe make a few mistakes? Absolutely. But quarterback, he's not Rodgers. Sanchez might make a mistake. But he has enough around him on offense going against this Titan team, who only had 30 yards rushing with Sankey, and just coming off the loss they did, and how the Steelers were able to run the ball. Philadelphia can do the same thing, and I expect them to win this game in a tight one. I think Tennessee's offense can get through the Eagles secondary. But that's why I'm taking the Eagles over the Titans. Patriots over Lions. This was tough for me because I've definitely been impressed with Detroit's entire year. And I definitely see where you look at definitely the way both teams are run. They kind of have both, similar qualities. I do believe they said that Reggie Bush should be back, which will be nice for this running game, who really could not get anything going against the Cardinals' run defense, and definitely it'll be nice to also have him in the receiving threat. But here's my rationale for New England not losing this game. If Patrick Peterson and Antonio Cromartie can hold Calvin Johnson and Golden Tate for 100 yards combined, I see the New England secondary doing the same thing. New England's defense only held the Colts to about 20 yards rushing the entire game. That's incredibly impressive looking at what Ahmad Bradshaw and Trent Richardson had done the whole year going into that. Do I think Stafford, will test Megatron or Reeves? Absolutely, I think he will. But just looking at what New England has, looking at how dominant Rob Gronkowski is turning back into, I don't see Detroit's secondary being able to stop that. And also, I don't see how Brady won't be able to dissect this Detroit secondary apart. Stan had 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he had Fitzgerald and Floyd. You give Brady Gronk, LaFell, Edelman, and he's a much better, proven quarterback. He will do the same exact thing. I think Detroit can definitely put up a fight because they can get pressure on Brady. But if I have to go with Patriots offense at home against that weak Detroit secondary, or Detroit, going into New England, I'm going to take New England every time. So that's why I'm taking the Patriots over the Lions. Green Bay and Minnesota, I'm taking Green Bay just because Green Bay's on a roll. They're playing a Minnesota team that looked very anemic offensively. Their secondary got torched by Jay Cutler, who had his best game since the one in Atlanta. He did throw 2 interceptions. And I just, they don't. The last time the Vikings won was the last game in 2012. Ever since then, the majority of the time, the Green Bay Packers have beaten the Vikings. And I just don't see with how dominant and rolling this team is, and especially with the news about Adrian Peterson being suspended the rest of the year, their psyche's a bit down. And I just don't see Minnesota being able to run the ball that much against Green Bay's defense. Sean McCoy couldn't do it, and Forte had somewhat of a good game. And also just looking at Green Bay's secondary, their secondary is starting to come to form. And with the limited weapons that Minnesota has, even though Cordero and Jennings are okay, and Jennings gets to play his former team, I don't see that nearly being enough to stop this Packers offense. And Green Bay should be able to roll through the Vikings en route to their big game, the game of the week, the game against the New England Patriots. And I'm going to make this my second lock. Again, just before I'm going to make this game my second lock, which is Green Bay over Minnesota. Jacksonville and Indianapolis, again, another easy decision here. Indianapolis, I'm calling them the leader of the pretenders because they've beaten Cincinnati and Baltimore. And even though they have lost to Pittsburgh, they still have lost to Philadelphia, New England, Denver, and Philadelphia, New England, Denver, and Pittsburgh. And I think that, now with the Texans being 5-5 and right on the, their doorstep, I think it's going to be extremely interesting to see if the Texans can make a run, especially if Ryan Mallett continues to evolve. But I just don't see any way this Jacksonville team beats Indy. Indy has been dominant mostly at home. The last time they played them, they won, I think, 44 to 17. They blew them out. Jacksonville's offense has been weak. Their secondary can be shredded up by luck. They have the number 1 passing offense in the league. Jacksonville really has no offense. I think that if Denard Robinson could do what Jonas Gray could do, that could help them, but I don't see him getting that many yards and that many touchdowns. And with that, that's how the Colts are going to win this game. I think, again, Jacksonville can have a little bit of a fight, but I think they're on their way to another losing season and possibly relocation into Los Angeles. So that's why I'm taking the Colts over the Jaguars. Bengals over Texans. Look, this one is extremely difficult because Andy Dalton's career in Houston, Texas has been terrible, even though he is a TCU kid. So he knows the state of Texas. But let's remember this. He is 0-3 in the playoffs. He's only thrown 1 touchdown to 4 interceptions, I think, in those 2 playoff games. And in the road game, he lost to T.J. Yates. That Texan team was able to beat Andy Dalton with T.J. Yates. But I guess here's the thing. Ryan Mallett is better than T.J. Yates. But Andy Dalton needs to silence the Houston critics. This is almost like his kryptonite in the NFL world. He's had a horrible track record against Houston. And after a spectacular road performance that nobody expected, the Bengals need to win this game. I think A.J. Green and Sanu can go up against those Houston corners. Will J.J. Watt wreak havoc? Yes, he will. I don't know if he'll catch another touchdown. That'll be a different case. But kudos to him for doing that. By the way, he does have 1 more reception touchdown than Andre Johnson. Or 1 more touchdown than Andre Johnson. So think about that. And I think Houston can definitely win this game. They should get Arian Foster back. I think hopefully this weekend that'll be a huge help because I think he's run for over 100 yards in each of their games against Cincinnati in the past. But if he doesn't come back, I think Alfred Blue is not going to run for 156 yards against this Bengals defense. And I think Andy Dalton just has to show that in a game against an average Texans team that's maybe a little bit underrated, he can get over the Houston hump and beat this team. Because we're going to go right back to where we were about this Bengal team going, who are the real Bengals? They need to show some consistency, and with the final 6 weeks left in the AFC North, this division is wide open. And Pittsburgh's already beat Houston, and Cleveland has already lost to them. The Ravens play them in a few weeks. The Bengals would love to get a win just to have some separation over the Browns and possibly the Ravens. And I think with Dalton, with his momentum, and with this team, he has enough to beat this Texan team because I don't expect Ryan Mallett to do that much better. So that's why I'm taking the Bengals over the Texans. Jets at Bills. This was very interesting because the Jets are on a bye and they're rested. But they're going up to Buffalo, and if you've watched any of the news, I feel bad for the city of Buffalo. They've had over 4 feet of snow dumped on them, and they're expecting another 3 feet by the end of tomorrow. So the game, from what I just heard, is still going to play, still going to happen. But I think in those conditions, it'll be a lot tougher for both teams. But I'm going to take the Bills because I remember last year the Bills shut out the Jets with Geno Smith. Okay, and I don't see Michael Vick maybe being able to have enough time against the Bills like he did against the Steelers. Michael Vick used his athleticism a majority of that game, but he didn't have that much pressure either, so he was able to make plays. Remember, he played a majority of the Jets-Bills game a few weeks ago in that 43-22 drubbing, and he fumbled 3 times. I don't expect Vick to have that many fumbles, but I do expect him to be down under that much pressure that offense is not nearly going to be as effective. And I don't expect Chris Ivory and Chris Johnson to be able to get through one of the better run defenses in the entire league. I think the Jets with their momentum, and if Vic can continue to show movement and improvement, they can make a run for the Bills because it's a division rival. And definitely, especially of how weak the Bills looked, only scoring 9 points against the Dolphins, I think they have a chance. But Miami's secondary is way better than the Jets, and I expect Kyle Warren to be able to make more throws this time and dominate, even though it will not be 43-22. So that's why I'm taking the Bills to beat the Jets. Tampa at Chicago. This was really enticing for me to take Tampa, just because it'd be a great little stamp on Trestman's send-out card if the former head coach of the Bears went back into Chicago with the team that he's now coaching and he beat them. But I just had to look at myself and say, Chicago's in a little bit of a roll. Tampa's secondary, for the most part, has proven that they can't handle some big receivers. It's Cutler versus McCown. I think the starting quarterback proves that the backup was wrong. I think you could say Tampa's still a better team. These two records are deceiving. People would say Tampa's been the better team. They just haven't won as much. But I just expect Chicago their talent enough to beat this Bucs team. The Bucs will put up a fight because after looking at what they did against the Redskins, they're motivated and they're still playing hard for Lovie Smith. But you give me Tampa's receivers on Chicago's corners or Chicago's receivers on Tampa's corners, I'll take Chicago's. And also I'll take Matt Forte over Bobby Rainey or Doug Martin. And again, Cutler over McCown. And I think the Bears get some confidence and they at least get back to 500 to just feel that they maybe still have a slight chance of getting into the playoffs. Even though, hey, Tampa, 2-8, you're only 2 games back out of with 6 games left. You're still in the NFC South race, which is still sad, but I digress. So that's why I'm taking the Bears over the Bucs. Arizona over Seattle. This was extremely tough for me because I've always been a huge believer in Seattle's home environment. But after looking at what they did against Kansas City and looking at what Arizona did against Detroit, I think Arizona has an advantage in this game. Arizona can shut down Marshawn Lynch. They've done it before. And then if you really think about it, Seattle's offense has a much harder matchup than Drew Stanton does against Seattle's secondary. Because Arizona at least has a giant load of weapons that they can work with. You have Fitzgerald, you have Floyd, you have John Brown, you have Carlson. Russell Wilson does not nearly have enough weapons to counteract Arizona's secondary. So Seattle's basic directive will be just to run. And looking at how good Seattle's run defense or Arizona's run defense has been, and looking at how bad Seattle's has been at times, I expect Arizona to have a better day on the ground, and Stanton to make enough plays, or his defense will bail him out of a few mistakes to win this game. And also, Seattle was 21-2 at home over the last 23 games. One of those two teams that beat them was Arizona. So they've done this before. Stanton will do enough, and I expect their defense and their run game, just like last week, to carry them. And I expect Stanton to actually have a better game. I think Stanton can use his weapons and make throws to beat some of their corners, where I don't think Seattle, with the weapons they have, they will not be able to. So that's why I'm taking Arizona over Seattle. St. Louis over San Diego. This is my upset of the week. This might be a little bit of an upset, but I'm just going to trust St. Louis in the fact that the Oakland Raiders absolutely whipped the Chargers' offensive line. Rivers got hit 9 times, he got sacked 3 times, and it was just pathetic to see. And if Oakland can do that, imagine what St. Louis's pass rush can do. Look at this. Phillip Rivers threw for 198 yards and a touchdown. And they only could score 13 points against the Oakland Raiders, where they had given up 45 to the Broncos the week before. I'm not saying they would have put up 45 themselves. I'm just saying that San Diego is going up against a defense that's motivated. They've shut down some of the better offenses and some of the better teams. And I also think if they injured Phillip Rivers, who has some, rib damage, I just don't like that matchup. I think Sean Hill can do enough. San Diego's secondary is getting depleted. And I think even though Brandon Flowers will kind of shut down one of their receivers, he will shut down one of their receivers, I expect St. Louis to win this game. Their secondary plays tough enough that they can handle San Diego's receivers, especially Keenan Allen. I think Malcolm Floyd might be a little bit of a challenge because of his size, but I think St. Louis's pass rush and defense will show up again and actually give the Rams more credit for their year. And I don't think San Diego will be able to handle the St. Louis pass rush and their workload. So that's why I'm taking I'm taking the Rams to beat the Chargers. Denver over Miami. This was extremely tough for me because I saw what St. Louis's defense did, and I know what Miami's defense has. It's almost the same blueprint, and actually Miami has a better secondary than St. Louis did. But I'm just going to take the Broncos because I expect Julius Thomas to play. I think Sanders probably won't play, but I don't think they'll need him. And I think Thomas, Welker, and Julius Thomas can do enough. And I don't expect Miami, with Tannehill and Manning, I expect Denver's defensive line to be able to get some pressure on them, just like Buffalo's was. I don't think not as much because Mario Williams had 3.5 sacks. And also Denver's at home, and as you've clearly seen with this team, they are much better at home than away. They're kind of like the AFC version of Green Bay, where on the road they've looked absolutely pathetic at times, but at home they've looked absolutely dominant. And I'm going to trust Manning to bounce back, even though he has thrown 3 straight multi-interception games, which is surprising. But I think Denver's offense should be able to do enough with the weapons they have, even limited or not, to beat this Miami team, because I don't think Tannehill, if he's trying to get into a shootout with Manning, it's not going to work. That's what I'm thinking. The Broncos over the Dolphins. San Francisco over Washington. San Francisco has a lot of momentum, even though they did get Alden Smith back, and Ahmad Brooks did bench himself, but Jim Harbaugh said that he does expect him to play. Tampa put up 27 points. San Francisco has a much better offense going against that secondary. RG3 is going to be running around for his life, looking at Alden Smith or Justin Smith or Brooks or Chris Borland or any of those guys. And I just feel confident in the Niners. There's really nothing for the Redskins that I can see that San Francisco doesn't have a better edge in. And knowing how RG3's been playing, he might get hurt again. Knowing how many times he's got beaten up by the Niners last year. And that's what I'm thinking, the Niners over the Redskins. Kind of like Cowboys and Giants. Dallas Cowboys. Eli Manning threw 5 interceptions. And maybe just like in Washington, it's time for New York to make a change at quarterback. Eli Manning has an incredible resume. He is one of the greatest Giant quarterbacks of all time, and you could say he's one of the greatest postseason quarterbacks of all time. But with the string of mediocrity this man has had over the last 2 years, along with the tenure, along with what he's done ever since 2011, it's time for the Giants to make a change. He's been there for 10 years. He's led the league now in interception 3 times, and he's probably going to lead it again for a 4th time. To lead the league in interceptions in back-to-back years, to have 3 straight to have 2 straight losing seasons the way it's looking to be, it's time for Eli to go and Nassib to see what he can do. And I also just spoke of how bad that Giants run defense has shown. DeMarco Murray, the leading rusher in the league, should be able to rip right through him. And that'll be enough with a confident Romo to beat this Giant team and set up a phenomenal Thanksgiving matchup with 8-3 Philadelphia going to 8-3 Dallas. That's the game that I want to watch because there's a lot on the line for that game. It'll be fun to see. And finally, Baltimore and New Orleans. And I'm not being a homer on this one. I'm actually going to take the Ravens in this one just because I feel that if San Francisco and Cincinnati can go into New Orleans and cause the Saints to lose their first back-to-back home games for the first time in 5 years, I think Baltimore can do it as well. Look, am I scared for our secondary? Absolutely. Our secondary is killed, and they have an offense that definitely doesn't help us. But looking at how bad that Saints defense has played, looking at how uninspired, they can't really run the ball. And I think we can shut down Mark Ingram. They just lost Brandon Cooks, who's on IR, so they lost a little speedy weapon. And I just believe that our offense can do enough to beat this Saints team. We have Steve and Torrey, and I think we can beat their corners. Owen Daniels can do enough at the tight end position. He's not going to do what Jimmy Graham does, but nobody's better than maybe Jimmy Graham besides Gronk at that. But we have a decent run game that we control the clock with. We can stop the run. I think our secondary can get a few plays on their receivers just to hold off this Saints team because I think the Ravens need it and the Saints really don't. Because I expect if Atlanta loses, they're still tied at 4-7. This is going to be, I'm going to guarantee this right now, this will be worse than the NFC West 5 years ago. I think you actually could have a possibility of having a team with 6 wins win that division, looking at how bad all these teams are. But I'm going to go with the Ravens. They have a better defense. The run game they can shut down, and if we can make Drew Brees one-dimensional, even though it is the dimension he likes, I don't expect them to be able to do enough against a rested Raven team and looking at what New Orleans has done over the last 2 weeks. And I don't think New Orleans will be that concerned because, again, they're in a 4-6 division. So those are my thoughts on all the games this week. Like, comment, rate, subscribe. And just once again, for my locks, I'm going to take Kansas City over Oakland. That's my first lock. Green Bay over Minnesota. That's my second. And San Francisco over Washington. That's my third. Those are my 3 locks. So, like, comment, rate, subscribe. If you have any questions or any football aspects you'd like to ask me, put them in the comment section. I'd love to hear from everybody. And that's it. So, good luck to all teams, all players, all fantasy players, and all fellow prognosticators. And until next week, this is Matthew Fanatic signing off. Till then, so long.